So Peter is very much
No, sir,
eager.
my mom is disturbing me, bringing me food, sir. That's why I was telling her to go.
Okay, students. So good morning, everyone. So it's 9:20 and we start our class today. So this is class 3 of the Macroeconomics I. So till now I have shared all the class recordings as well as the board work which I've done in this online class to share with you on Google Classroom platform. I have also shared the tentative lesson plan with you. So in what I'm going to do is I've shared the tentative lesson plan. So today is class 3 and today I'll be ending the discussion on the scope and objectives of macroeconomics. So let me share the screen now. Yes. I hope everyone can see. Yeah, everyone can see?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So yesterday we discussed about classical and Keynesian schools of thought. Okay. So we discussed what was the classical theory of output and employment and what is the Keynesian theory of output and employment. Now, today we will begin a discussion about what are the main differences between classical and Keynesian theories. So first difference is in with respect to the time frame. Okay, so this is the first reference to a time frame. So classical theorists, they were concerned with a long-term view, that is, economy will always return to full employment level. Okay, full employment level in the long run. But what is the Keynesian tell? Keynesian theory always held a short-term view. That is, there are periodic or short-term fluctuations in aggregate effective demand and hence aggregate output. Okay. So this was the first difference between the classical and the Keynesian theory, that is a time frame. Secondly, second difference is supply and demand. So classical theory is basically a supply side theory. So what does it say? It says that output is a function of the level of technology and the level of full employment. That is the employment level at which market demand for labor and market supply for labor clear out. Okay, and we already know that that full employment is a function of real wage rate. Okay, so in essence, classical theory says that the level of output and employment, which they always believe to be at a full employment level, and economy always exists at full employment equilibrium. So it's always a function of real wage rate. Okay, and through real wage rate, output is a function of the technology as well as the level of employment in the economy. Okay, what did the Keynesian say? Keynesian basically is a demand side theory. So Keynesian theorists, they say that output is a function of aggregate effective demand in the economy. So when the aggregate effective, so it moves along with the aggregate effective demand in the economy, they move hand in hand till the output reaches the full employment level. So below full employment level, output is always a function of aggregate effective demand. Okay. Now you have got the third point. So what is that? Third point is price and output determination. So according to the classical theorists, since the output level is always at a full employment level, which is dependent on the exogenous factors like the level of employment and technology, so demand in the economy actually determines the price level. Whereas the Keynesians, since Keynesians believe that output below the full employment level is a function of aggregate effective demand, so according to them, aggregate effective demand determined the output as well as the level of employment till the full employment level, and beyond the full employment level, aggregate effective demand determine the price level. Okay. Next difference is full employment. Just a minute, I have some visitors. So, full employment and unemployment. Okay, full employment and what? Unemployment. Fine. So, classical economists, they said that market equilibrium level in the economy will always be at full employment equilibrium, whereas the Keynesians say that since output is a function of aggregate effective demand, so there can also be an under employment equilibrium whereby the aggregate output in the economy is below the full employment level output. Okay. Next comes the monetary and fiscal policy. So the classical theorists, they believe in the efficacy of monetary policy to control the price level or any instability in the economy or any disequilibrium in the economy from the full employment level. Whereas the Keynesians, if you remember Keynes' speculative theory of demand for money, whereby the economy reaches a liquidity trap level where there is infinite, where the demand for money is infinitely interistic. So whatever money supply is being made in the economy will be scooped up by the people in the form of speculative balances, and they will not create any additional effective demand in the economy. So the Keynesians believe that the monetary policy is ineffective at times of underemployment or recession, and they advocated fiscal policy to increase aggregate effective demand as a complement, as a supplementary measure, so as to bring the total output closer or if not equal to the full employment level. Okay, so these are the basic differences between the classical and the Keynesian schools of thought. So this all we have to say right now about the Keynesian and the classical theories to begin with. Now we already started a discussion what are the major issues or questions of macroeconomics. Okay. Major questions or issues of macroeconomics. Before I progress further, Peter.
Yes,
Peter,
sir.
did you open the class notes which I sent yesterday, the board work?
No, sir, I haven't opened, sir. I just checked out your video, sir, which you have uploaded.
Okay, Suraj, did you see the class board work?
Yes, sir. Sir,
Any
actually,
issue?
I have a question for that. Yeah, that one. Sir, about that board work for that second class, I think there was a board work missing, sir, because I saw only two, and the just the board work just before that Sage law is missing, I think, sir.
Oh, I have to
Sir,
check it.
please check on that. Yes, sir.
I have to check into that. Okay. So what are the major issues or questions of economics? So first major issue is employment and unemployment. So what are the factors that affect this employment and unemployment? So by now we already know that there is a relationship between, for a given technology, there is a relationship between output and employment. Okay. So that means when we discuss about employment and unemployment, basically we are discussing that what determines the aggregate output level. So what are the determinants of this aggregate output, either if you look at it from the classical perspective or the Keynesian perspective, and hence then how once this question is addressed, then it will also determine that what determines this aggregate employment and hence the level of unemployment in the economy. Okay. So we have already discussed the Keynesian in some grossly that how that Keynesian theory as well as the classical theory that what determines the level of employment and unemployment in the economy. Okay. Now, second major issue is income determination. So now for a given technology, if a technology is given, as I mentioned in yesterday's class and just now only, employment and output will go hand in hand. Okay. So whenever the output will also increase and whenever employment decreases, output will also decrease. So income determination, that means for a given technology, employment and output will go hand in hand. Okay. So when economy is at full employment level, all the resources, whether capital or labor, will be gainfully employed, and that will lead to full employment equilibrium, where the economy will be at a potential output level. Okay. In consonance with the productive capacity of the economy. Now, when there are fluctuations, according to the Keynesian theory, when there are fluctuations in demand, then what will happen? It will also lead to fluctuations in output level. Okay. So as there will be fluctuations in output level, this will also lead to fluctuations in employment. Okay, and as it will lead to fluctuations in employment, so this will also lead to what? Just a minute. So this will also lead to what? Fluctuations in income, because when the factors of production are employed, whether it is labor or capital, so in exchange for supplying these factors, they get paid either wages or rent or profits or interest. Okay, so there will be fluctuations in income, but keep this thing in mind. All these economic theories, which I also mentioned yesterday, either classical or Keynesian, will always be applicable in case of your capitalist or developed economies, which are usually where you have the full employment equilibrium. So this will be applicable only in case of the capitalist or developed economy. So it is not applicable in case of emerging or less developed or underdeveloped economies. Why? Because there are structural deficiencies that is preventing the economies to reach or to attain full employment.
Sir,
Yeah.
like it's lagging a bit, sir.
Okay. Now is it A? Because I think now it is coming. Full employment equilibrium. Okay. So this is what happens in case of income determination. So keep this thing in mind when we talk about income determination or any fluctuations that leads to fluctuations in income. Also, these theories are only applicable in case of capitalist or developed economies. They are not applicable in case of emerging, less developed or underdeveloped economies. Fine. So the next point which comes is your inflation. So according to classical theory, what is inflation? Tridit, inflation is what according to classical theory?
So rise in the prices of goods and services.
So it is what type of phenomenon? Quantity theory of money, what does it say? I discussed yesterday also.
Like if there is an increase in the money supply by the central bank, then like aggregate price level will also goes up.
Very good. So it is what phenomenon?
So monetary phenomenon.
Yes, very good. So Tridit's taekwondo is now helping him to remember things. Okay? But Keynes had a different view. So he said that this is basically a structural phenomenon. So what is a structural phenomenon? So according to him, it happens because of inflationary gap. And what is this inflationary gap? So as I already said, that Keynes believed that output is a function of aggregate effective demand. Okay? Now, if the aggregate effective demand, if the output level is below the full employment level output or the potential output or according to the productive capacity of the economy, then the output will keep on increasing without any change in the price level, okay, till it reaches the full employment. Once it has reached the full employment level, then if there is further increase in effective demand or aggregate demand, then that will be followed by increase in price level. So that's what he's saying, that it's a structural phenomenon. Structural phenomenon means what? It has to do with the supply side constraints. So according to him, so this has to do with the supply side constraints. It can also happen because of other issues, which is terming as cost push inflation. So cost push inflation happens why? Cost push inflation happens because of increase in the price of any resource as a result of its shortage or scarcity. So when there is shortage or scarcity of any resource, that will lead to increase in price, which will also lead to increase in inflation, and that is what he is telling us cost push inflation. Even if there is no change in the monetary money supply or any change in aggregate effective demand. Okay. Next, we come to the issue of business cycles. Okay. So business cycles is nothing but, as I've already mentioned, that they are talking about any periodic fluctuations in employment and output. Okay. So it is nothing but any periodic fluctuations in employment and what? Output. Now, according to business cycles, there can be 4 phases of the economy. So what are the 4 phases? Depression, recession, recovery, and boom, which is nothing but prosperity. Okay. So depression means when there is severe fall in output and employment. Recession is also reflecting that phase of the economy where there is a fall in output and employment, but that is basically of a moderate or mild fall in output and employment. So currently our economy is in what? Depression or recession or recovery? Suraj?
Recovery, sir.
Okay. So somewhere between recession and recovery. So recovery means when there is a mild or moderate increase in output and employment. Okay. So that means after falling to a very low level, when the economy starts again bouncing back towards the full employment output level. And what is boom? When there is first increase in output and employment. So this happens when the economy has already reached the full employment level after this first increase in output employment, and it also has a tendency to overshoot that full employment output level. So when it happens, so that means what is happening? There will be overworking or overutilization of the factors of production, and economy reaches at a point of heating up. Okay. So these are the 4 phases of the economy, and business cycle is basically interested in studying these different phases of this economy, that is depression, recession, recovery, boom, and what are the factors that are leading to different phases in the economy. Okay. So this is one of the, next comes here one more issue, stagflation. So stagflation was an issue which was observed for the first time in a systematic manner in 1970s. So what happened in case of this stagflation? Stagflation basically means that we usually know in economics that there is a trade-off, that there is trade-off between inflation and employment. So there is a trade-off between inflation and employment. So what is this trade-off? Trade-off means that there's an inverse relationship. So if inflation rises, employment will fall, and if employment rises, inflation will, if inflation, I'm extremely sorry. So there is a direct relationship between inflation and employment. So employment rises, inflation also rises, and vice versa. But stagflation, when there was this oil price shock, for the first time in the global economy, it was observed that along with increase in inflation, there is also increase in unemployment. Okay? So this was observed for the first time. This is a very, very unusual phenomenon. Now it is more or less, there are theoretical explanations that why such phenomenon happens, but nonetheless it's a very unusual phenomenon. So stagflation is basically interested in study of those situations whereby we see these two things happening at the same point of time: increase in inflation and increase in unemployment. So basically it happens because of supply side issues. So it is basically associated with supply side issues or constraints. So oil price shock was what? Oil price shock was that there was certain increase in the price of oil, and as oil is a raw material or it's a main source of energy, so sudden increase in price in price of oil led to huge increase in the cost of production. So as there was huge increase in cost of production, the price of the commodities increased, so that there was a fall in the output and fall in demand. So that led to fall in output and also fall in unemployment. But at the same point of time, there was also increase in inflation. Okay. Now, next we get to something which is very critical, and you will learn this in your development economics. That is what? Economic growth. So economic growth is something which is on a very long-term basis. Okay. So this is nothing but sustained and compounded increase in production of goods and services. Right? Sustained and compounded increase in production of goods and services for a long period. So over a long time period. So growth refers to the sustained and compounded increase in production of goods and services. So basically, it measures that how fast economy can increase its productive, not only just its productive capacity, but also the actual production of goods and services. But one needs to keep in mind that aggregate demand also needs to increase to support this consistent increase in production of goods and services, isn't it? Now, where does this Keynesian and the classical theorist come into the picture? So if I see the Keynesian and the classical theories where they are coming into the picture, you will see that as far as Keynes is concerned, he always had a short-term view. Okay, and he was always concerned with demand side management. So effectively he ignored this growth aspect. But when we speak about the classicists or the classical economists, they always had a long-term view. And what did they say? That output is always a function of technology and the level of employment in the economy, which is the full employment equilibrium. So they were basically concerned about what? Supply side management. And hence, they actually somehow, may not be directly, but indirectly considered the growth aspect. So the classical theorists actually believe that if you're consistently increasing the total availability of goods and services in the economy, that will lead to what? Maximum social welfare. So according to them, growth according to them, growth is prerequisite for maximum social welfare. Okay, growth is a prerequisite for maximum social welfare. Fine. Now, apart from this, then there came, following this classical line of thought, then there came these growth theorists. Okay, so then there was this growth theories. So what did this growth theories say? So growth theories stressed on two main aspects, that as you keep on increasing the productive capacity of the economy, what is critical for growth to happen is that you also generate savings from your output, that means from your income, and that savings is channelized into investment for expansion or development of technology and productive capacity of the economy in terms of machinery, capital, and training and skilling of the human resources. So this also comes indirectly somehow from the Keynesian Keynesian theory. So what does Keynesian theory say? Keynesian theory says that savings is a function of investment. Savings is a function of income, whereas investment is a function of rate of interest. So people who are investing will be interested about the returns they're getting, and if they say that the returns from their investment is greater than the market rate of interest, then they will invest more, and vice versa. So there is an inverse relationship between the rate of interest and investment. Whereas to support this investment, you need funds, and from where do you get these funds? You get these funds from savings, and savings comes from where? Savings comes from income. So higher the level of income, higher the rate of savings. So more funds can be channelized into investment. So this consistent investment over a period of time leads to consistent increase in the productive capacity in the economy, and which then supports the growth in the long run. So this was the starting point of the growth model, which was the Harrod-Domar growth model. So basically they were Keynesian economists. So they drew their concepts initially from the Keynesian theory and developed this growth model. And later on, a lot of people came. Solow was there. So there was Solow. Then there was Sen, Passinati, about which you will be learning in your development economics course on this, that how they further develop this growth model. Okay. So next, after this economic growth, what comes is your so you have got this economic growth. Now, apart from economic growth, as I mentioned that you will be studying about them in development economics, what is also side by side with economic growth is important is economic development. So you students have already started your class on development economics, and I believe you already had 3 or 4 classes of development economics. So what did you start with in development economics? Cindy? Cindy? Suraj?
Sir, most of it is about the difference between economic growth and economic development.
Okay, very good. So you're on the right track. So basically, growth I've already mentioned that it means sustained increase in the production of goods and services in the economy, but development goes even beyond that. So as I said, that growth is necessary. It's a prerequisite. Growth is necessary for development, but it is not sufficient for development. So for development, you need to also develop the other aspects. So provision of essential services, which are like health, education, then social security, then opportunities. So these are very important alongside growth to usher in economic development. Also, enhancement of capabilities and freedom to acquire and utilize the capabilities to access the fruits of growth, which can be done either through employment as a salaried or through business, and in old age through social security or retirement benefits. So there are other aspects, other parameters. So quality of life, improvement of quality of life, then standard of living, then equity in distribution of growth, impacts of growth or fruits of growth. So these are all these aspects which are important apart from growth to usher in economic development. But remember, you can only fulfill these conditions when you have got these resources. And resources have to be in sufficient amount, and that can only happen when growth happens. So without growth, you cannot usher in economic development. Okay, so keep this thing in mind very clearly. And the last issue which we discuss is about your balance of, I think this is 6 mostly. Okay, 5, 6. Yeah, this is sorry, this is 7. Balance of payments and exchange rate. Okay, so balance of payments. So I have already said that we just don't exchange goods and services within the economy, but also with the rest of the world. So here, when we buy from the rest of the world, we have to use foreign currency. So when we use foreign currency, what we do, we convert our domestic currency into foreign currency, for which the exchange rate is important. That against how many Indian rupees can we get $1 to buy a foreign product or a commodity. Now, when we buy more from the outside world than what we receive from the outside world, then what is happening? We are running deficit in account with the outside world. So then we say that we have a balance of payments deficit. So it is not just we trade in goods and services, but we also trade in what? Financial assets. We also trade in some investments. Financial assets means bonds, then shares, debentures, different financial papers which you have. And investment means, let's say, if you're investing in some productive capacity abroad, the returns you're getting back as income. So if our receipt from the outside world is less than our payments to the outside world, will run a balance of payments deficit, and vice versa, and that is all affected by the exchange rate. So exchange rate is one of the critical factors that determines the state of balance of payments with the rest of the world, apart from the pattern of our demand of goods and services or financial assets that we also generate with vis-a-vis rest of the world. So these are the major issues in macroeconomics. Next, we move to the economic role of government. So economic role of government gets played out through two important policies, that is monetary policy and fiscal policy. So Tridit, what did you learn about the monetary money supply in Indian monetary system as well as money banking and finance? What did you study? How can you increase money supply or how can you reduce money supply? What are the instruments of controlling money supply?
Sir, we increase the bank rate, then
Okay. What else?
Then by raising the reserve ratio of banks, then
What about selling government bonds to the public or buying government bonds from the public?
oh yeah, like so we can by
When
making
you sell government bonds to the public, new government bonds, freshly
yes.
issued government bonds to the public, what happens to the money supply?
it like reduces.
Very good. So when you increase the bank rate, what happens?
Same thing, like same.
Or the reserve requirement. So the money supply reduces. So by using all these instruments through central bank or through the, in our case, Reserve Bank of India, the government can determine the monetary policy of the economy. So the basic objective of this monetary policy globally now is to manage inflation with a decent rate of growth. So understand that monetary policy can be effective in affecting the expansion of the economy only when it is not at a liquidity trap level. Okay. So when it is at a liquidity trap level, then monetary policy is not effective. Monetary policy is effective only in the intermediate range. Okay. Either in the intermediate range or in the classical range, monetary policy is effective. Fine. To increase. So when you are increasing the money supply, what is happening? There is, so more money supply means what? Actually, if there is excess supply of money, so the interest rate falls. So as the interest rate falls, what happens? Lot of investment opportunities becomes lucrative, and there is increase in investment. So which increases the production capacity of the economy. More production means more output and hence more employment, and more employment means what? More income. So more effective demand. So that sets up the chain reaction that increases the production of goods and services and further expansion of the economy. Next comes your fiscal policy. So what is this fiscal policy? Fiscal policy is something whereby you either increase the government expenditure, keeping the taxes constant, or you cut taxes, keeping the expenditure constant. So in either way, what is happening, you are, so in this first way, you are directly increasing the effective demand through increase in expenditure on goods and services and hence increase in government demand for goods and services. In taxes, you do it indirectly. So what is this indirect way? So when you reduce the taxes, you increase the disposable incomes. That means if you're reducing taxes means what? People have to pay more. If you reduce taxes means what? People has to pay less taxes. So as they pay less taxes, that means what? They have got more income in their hand. So if they have more income in their hand, what will happen? There will be more effective demand for goods and services. So that will lead to more expansion of the economy. So the role of the government is actually to regulate either the money supply to manage inflation with a decent rate of growth through monetary policy, or to utilize their fiscal policy, which is basically expansionary in nature, by either increasing government expenditure or taxes so as to incentivize. So when you also reduce taxes, what is happening? You are actually incentivizing more investment, because if you are deducting corporate taxes, so more investment will happen. And also, if you are reducing the taxes, personal income tax, so people will want to work more hard. Okay. So then they will work more. So then they'll get more income and hence more effective demand. So through using this fiscal policy and monetary policy, the government plays an important role in determining the level of output in the economy. So when the output level is below the full employment level. Okay. So this is where the economic role of the government plays out. Now, what can come next is your so today so what can come next is your this thing. Yeah. So what are the policies to promote growth? Okay. So what are the policies to promote growth? So basically the policies to promote growth, if you see, are same as the policies which I've discussed just now, which are the monetary and fiscal policies. Okay. So monetary and fiscal policies are there to promote growth of this, economy. So when I am using this monetary policy to reduce the interest rate by increasing the money supply, so more investment happens. That means it is increasing the productive capacity of the economy in a consistent level. So that means that leads to consistent increase in production, goods and services. Similarly, through fiscal policy, that is only tax cut, not the government increase in expenditure. I will come back later to that, why increasing government expenditure is not a very good way to promote growth, but cutting taxes is actually considered a better option, because when you cut the taxes, you're actually incentivizing further investment and further incentive to work hard and for longer hours. So which will actually increase employment, which will actually increase more labor force participation, more investment, that means more availability of capital stock, and hence along with that improvement in technology, and hence more increase in productive capacity in a consistent basis for a long term, in a long term manner. So these are the different policies which are being followed by the government, not only to bring the employment or keep the employment as close as possible to the full employment level and the output, as well as also to promote further expansion of the economy on a consistent basis over a long-term period by promoting growth. Okay. Now, there are certain paradoxes. So what are these paradoxes? So one paradox is paradox of thrift. That means paradox of savings. The second paradox is wage employment paradox. So what is this paradox of thrift? As I've already said, that savings is a function of income. So more income means more savings, and if you want to save more, that means if you have a more propensity to save, what will happen? As I said, that will generate more funds for investment, and if there are more funds for investment, that means what? More productive capacity for the future. So more expansion of goods and services in the future, and hence more growth in the economy. But what Keynes actually said, that what is true at the individual level may not be true at the macro level or the aggregate level. So what happens that if following a given individual, all the individuals in the economy keeps on saving rather than consuming, that means if savings increases, what happens? Demand will fall. And as demand falls, according to the Keynesian theory, what will happen? The output will fall. And as the output fall, what is happening? Labor or the unemployment will fall. And as the unemployment falls, what happens? Income will fall. So if income falls, then what will happen? There will be fall in, effective demand. So that will set up a chain reaction because of increase in the propensity to stay at the aggregate level, whereby this will set up this will trigger fall in aggregate demand. Falling is there will fall in aggregate output and fall in employment, and hence the economy will reach a low employment or underemployment equilibrium. So paradox of thrift is actually cautioning against this increased propensity to save, which can actually destabilize or lead to more fluctuations at the output at the aggregate level. Next comes here wage employment paradox. So we already know that according to the classical theory, if the wage falls, that means if the giving the price level, if the wage is falling, then what will happen? This real wage will fall. And if real wage will falls, what happens? Demand for labor will increase. But at the other end, so this is the logic which we have studied in our factor market. So when there is demand for labor will increase, what will happen? More labor will be employed. And as more labor gets employed, what will happen? There will be more production and hence more output and hence more income. But if I look at the aggregate level, what is happening? At the aggregate level, if my real wage rate falls, what will happen? Or if my wage rate falls, then my income is falling. Okay. So if my income falls, then my demand will fall. For aggregate, for effective demand will fall, then my output will also fall. And if my output falls, what happens? Employment will fall. Because if my output is falling, then my labor demand will also fall by natural logic by the producer. Then my employment will fall. So this wage cut, which is being advocated to increase the labor demand and hence to increase the employment, where the labor demand and labor supply will equal each other, is something paradox in nature, because if it happens in the aggregate level as a result of fall in wage and as a real wage rate, your income will fall, which will trigger fall in aggregate effective demand and hence fall in aggregate output and aggregate employment. So again, the economy will go back to a low employment equilibrium level, which is not at all good for the economy. Okay. So these are the two paradoxes which we actually encounter when we study macroeconomics. Now, there are certain fallacies. So what are those fallacies? One fallacy is saving and investment. So at the aggregate level, aggregate savings will always be equal to aggregate investment in the economy. So whatever you are saving will be invested. But that may not be happening at the individual level. So individual may save more, invest less, and vice versa. So some individuals may only be saving, but they are not investing. But there will be certain individuals who are only investing and they are not saving. So for them, saving and investment will not be equilibrium. Second comes here, income and expenditure. So at the aggregate level, that means at the economy level, aggregate income will always be equal to aggregate expenditure. But at the individual level, it may happen that sometimes your income is more than your expenditure and sometimes your expenditure is more than your income. So these are the differences, the fallacies that happens when we consider an individual or and an economy. Next comes your budget deficit. So as a family, you cannot consistently run a deficit in your budget whereby your expenditure is more than your income. So if you consistently run a deficit, then a time may come there where nobody is willing to lend you money further. But when it comes to the aggregate level, let's say for the government, because of its sovereign entity nature, it can always run a deficit by spending more than income. And after that, it can decide to wipe away this deficit by raising resources from the public, either by increasing the money supply or by increasing the taxes. Okay. Next comes your internal and external borrowing. So in case of internal external borrowing, so as an individual, you can only borrow from inside the country. You cannot borrow money from outside the country. But as an economy, let's say big government, big corporations or the government can not only borrow from within the economy, or they can also borrow from the outside world. Okay. Next comes your trade-off in a full employment economy. So as an economy, you can, as an economy, what happens? You can always shift as an individual industry by offering more wages and incentives. You can attract resources from other industry to increase production in your industry. Okay, that can happen. So one firm can offer more wages and hence get workers from other firm or resources from other firm and increase production in his firm, whereby the second firm faces a fall in production of goods and services. So this internal adjustment can happen, trade-off can happen, but in a full employment economy, this trade-off is not possible. So so you cannot actually win away resources from one sector of the economy to the other sector to increase the overall output level in the economy. That is not possible. So whatever is the productive capacity in the economy, you cannot exceed the productive capacity. Next comes your mercantilist fallacy. Mercantilist fallacy. So in case of mercantilist fallacy, what is happening is this. So mercantilists were traders during the Middle Ages or just the beginning of the Renaissance period in England, who believed that a country can prosper or it can grow faster or it can develop faster if it always runs a trade surplus with the rest of the world. And they believe that they can run a trade surplus by accumulating more gold by exporting more and importing less vis-a-vis rest of the world. Now Adam Smith actually disputed or disproved this theory, because he said that if one country, it is not possible for all the countries of the world to run this trade surplus at the same point of time, because if I am, let's say there are two individuals, Tridit and Peter. Now they are just like two individuals. Now if Tridit wants to run a surplus, that means Peter needs to buy more from Tridit than what Tridit buys from Peter. Okay, so Peter will naturally run a deficit, trade deficit, whereas Tridit will run a surplus. So we cannot have both Tridit and Peter running surplus at the same point of time. So this is what is known as the mercantilist fallacy. Okay, so we stop here today. So this is what was our discussion about the introduction to macroeconomics, the need of studying macroeconomics, what are the different issues and perspectives of macroeconomics, and what are the two major schools of thought in macroeconomics. So I conclude here today, and yes, so any question? Any question? Any doubt? Peter?
No, sir.
So today also Peter is in a colorful T-shirt. Missing the Chennai, it seems. Huh?
That's the only T-shirt I have with me. So the rest are in hostel itself.
Okay, so you're missing the Chennai coast when you're seeing such heavy rainfall. That's good. So I will send you the video recordings as well as the class notes, and I will check what Suraj has just mentioned. And see you again tomorrow. And I will try to send the the scanned pages of the book that I'm following for this class. Okay. So thank you once again, and have a nice day.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
See you,
sir.
sir.
Okay. So,
Okay, sir.
okay. Fine.